My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 30 years old, a senior literary editor at a small but respected publishing house in Portland. If you met me, you'd probably call me the calm one in any group, soft-spoken, observant, never the person to interrupt, never the one to demand attention. That role always belonged to my younger sister, Lauren, 2 years younger, photogenic, loud in that curated influencer way, and somehow always the glittering sun around which our family revolved. Growing up, I learned quickly that silence kept the peace. When Lauren threw a tantrum because I was wearing the same color dress, Mom would sigh, "Just change, Claire. Be the bigger sister." When she crashed her car in high school, Dad said she was just exploring boundaries. When I got a full scholarship to a private university, my mom's reaction was, "Don't get too excited. Honey, you know Lauren struggles with grades. Those small dismissals stacked up like invisible stones, each one heavier than the last." Eventually, I stopped trying to be noticed and focused on building my own quiet life. Far from the drama, far from the suffocating hierarchy of our family unit. Or so I thought. Last year, Lauren got engaged to Ryan, a tech bro with perfect veneers and a handshake that felt like he was testing your weakness. I was polite. I even congratulated her during our Christmas dinner, though she announced her engagement mid-sentence while I was telling the family about my promotion. "Sorry, Claire, but this can't wait," she squealed, flashing her diamond ring like a lighthouse beam. My mom shrieked. My dad stood up, teary-eyed. I just smiled, holding my champagne glass mid-air, like a ghost caught between dimensions. Still, I thought maybe I'd be asked to help plan the engagement party. After all, I'm the older sister, the one with project management skills, the one who never says no. But weeks passed in silence. No phone call, no email, no save the date. Then, on a rainy Saturday, I opened Instagram and felt my breath freeze. There it was, a carousel of photos from Lauren's garden engagement party, champagne toasts, fairy lights, close-ups of the custom cake. My mother and father were in almost every shot, beaming like royalty. Even my cousin Lily flew in from college. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I waited a full day before calling my mom. When she picked up, her voice was casual, almost too cheerful, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Claire, everything okay?" I said, calmly but clearly. I saw the pictures. There was a beat of silence before she replied. "Oh." Then another pause. "We didn't think you'd want to come. You've always had complicated feelings about Lauren." I swallowed hard. "So you didn't invite me to avoid drama? You know how you get at events like this?" She added lightly, as if brushing off a crumb. "Lauren deserves a celebration without tension." And just like that, I saw it. Not just the exclusion, but the justification behind it, that I was the problem, that my quiet presence, my boundaries, my refusal to perform for them made me unfit to belong. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just said, "Then you won't mind missing my wedding, either." She laughed, dry, confused. "Claire, don't be ridiculous." I wasn't. I hung up and, for the first time in decades, felt something hard and hot and electric surge through me. Not sadness, not grief, but precision. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was done playing support in the Lauren show. I had been dating someone for nearly 2 years. Her name is Mariah, a pediatric nurse, thoughtful and fierce in the quietest ways. She had never once made me feel like I had to earn her affection. We'd spoken about marriage in whispers over morning coffee and lazy Sundays. But I hadn't proposed. I was waiting for the right moment, which, I realized now, would never come unless I made it myself. So, a month after that call with my mom, I proposed. Just the two of us in our apartment, over a takeout dinner and cheap wine. She said yes without hesitation, and I began planning something I never thought I'd have the courage to do, a wedding without my family. We didn't post anything online, didn't send out mass emails, or make announcements. I called Aunt Renee, my mom's estranged sister, who'd always been something of a rogue soul in the family tree. When I told her what had happened, she said, "Claire, you've been doing everything right for years. It's about damn time you chose yourself." She helped us pick a venue, an old manor on the outskirts of the city with ivy crawling up stone walls and a garden that smelled like lavender even in the winter. Mariah's family, warm, chaotic, generous, stepped in like scaffolding, holding me steady while I rebuilt something I didn't even know I needed. We mailed invitations the old-fashioned way, handwritten names, wax seals, no digital RSVPs. But I didn't send one to my parents, not to Lauren, not even to Lily. I didn't need them to know. I didn't need their opinions, their veiled criticisms, or their desperate attempts to center themselves in something that wasn't theirs to control. And for a few weeks, the silence felt clean, like breathing fresh air after years of secondhand smoke. Then, like always, the silence cracked. My cousin Lily saw the invitation on Renee's kitchen table and posted it on her Instagram story. Just a shot of the envelope and a single word, "Whoa." My mom saw it within hours. I knew because my phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from my mother, from Lauren, even from my dad who hadn't texted me in months. I ignored them all. Then, at 11:47 p.m., a text from my mom lit up my screen. "Claire, please, we didn't mean it like that." I stared at it for a long time, my pulse steady. They only reached out when they were left out. They only cared when the control slipped from their fingers. The next morning, another wave, voicemails, guilt-laced messages, accusations wrapped in velvet. "We're your family. This isn't right. You're being cruel." That word stuck in my throat like a splinter. Cruel, I wasn't cruel. I was careful. I was choosing peace over proximity, boundaries over betrayal. But the one message that shook me wasn't from my parents. It was from Lauren. "This is petty. Claire, you're acting like a child." That's when I knew she didn't understand. None of them did. And that realization brought with it not just sadness, but clarity. I had spent my whole life being the easy one, the quiet one, the forgivable one. Now, for once, I was the one drawing a line they couldn't cross. And if they thought they knew what was coming next, they were about to learn what it meant to be the daughter they didn't see until it was too late. 3 days after Lauren's message, I received an unexpected visit. Mariah and I had just come back from meeting the florist. She was humming to herself in the kitchen, swaying slightly as she unpacked leftover pastries when the doorbell rang. The knock was soft, uncertain, almost like the person on the other side wasn't sure they wanted to be there at all. I opened the door and froze. Lauren. She looked immaculate. As always, beige trench coat, loose waves, a curated, effortless aesthetic, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't sharp or smug. They were nervous, red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in like a stranger, touching nothing, arms crossed like she didn't know how to exist in my space. "Nice place," she said, awkwardly. "Very... you?" I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in small talk or staged vulnerability. She paused in the center of the room, like she was debating whether to sit or stay standing, and finally exhaled. "Claire, I didn't know Mom didn't invite you. I swear." My jaw clenched, arms folding almost involuntarily. "You didn't notice I wasn't there." Her gaze flickered. "I figured you were just being Claire. You know, too cool for the family stuff." She offered a brittle smile that disintegrated the moment I didn't return it. "Right," I said quietly. The same way I was too cool for all the birthdays I was left out of, the holidays no one told me about, the calls I never got. She blinked, guilt rippling across her face. "It's not fair," she said, "but that's just how Mom and Dad are. They always wanted me to be the star. I got used to it. I let that sink in." I had no interest in validating her confession. It wasn't bravery, it was convenience. "And you never thought to question that I asked? Never wondered how it felt to be the sister left holding the camera, watching your family smile without you?" She bit her lip. "Claire, I'm not here to defend them. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For my part in it. I should have noticed. Should have stood up for you years ago." The words hung between us like wet laundry, apology-shaped, but heavy with mildew. "Why now?" I asked. "Because you're not invited, or because people are starting to talk?" She didn't flinch, because I saw the Facebook post. Mom made it public, painted herself as the victim. Her voice cracked. "I told her to leave it alone. I told her I wanted to talk to you myself." That surprised me, slightly, enough to sit down. Lauren remained standing, twisting her ring nervously. "I'm not asking you to forgive her, or Dad, or even me, but I want to be there. Please. I want to be at your wedding, just me." I studied her face, for the first time. I didn't see the version of her that lived in Instagram filters and Christmas cards. I saw the girl who used to sneak into my room when we were kids, after having nightmares. The girl who once cried when I got a concussion at soccer practice, even though she wasn't supposed to care. That girl was still in there, buried beneath decades of conditioning, but I had no idea if I could trust her anymore. Before I could respond, my phone lit up with a new notification, a Facebook post from my mother. It read, "When your only daughter decides to erase her family from her life, you can't help but wonder where you went wrong. I raised her with love. I just hope she realizes it before it's too late." I turned the phone around and showed Lauren. Her jaw dropped. "She posted this today." I nodded. And just like that, whatever sincerity Lauren had walked in with splintered. She said she wouldn't post anything, said she'd let me try to fix things. I can't believe she trailed off and sat down, pressing her palms to her forehead. "She's not even upset about not being there," I said. "She's upset she can't be seen there." Lauren didn't argue. That silence said more than any apology could. I looked at her again, wondering how far the damage reached. How much of her identity had been scripted by a woman who demanded loyalty at the price of selfhood. "What do you want to do?" she asked, voice hollow. I didn't know. Not fully, but a thought had been simmering ever since this whole circus began, and now it was starting to crystallize. "I'm changing the guest list," I said. Lauren's eyes widened. "To what you?" I said. "And Aunt Renee, and Lily." She blinked, stunned. "That's it." I nodded. "You're the only one who showed up in person. The only one who didn't hide behind a comment section." She stared at me like she didn't believe it. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "But," I added, holding up a finger, "don't expect some magical reunion. Don't expect forgiveness. This is just a beginning." She nodded, and for once, Lauren didn't make it about herself. That night, I told Mariah everything. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she asked, "Do you want to respond, not online?" I said, "Not on their terms." She waited. Then how I smiled slowly. "By making this wedding ours. Unapologetically." She grinned, reached for my hand, and said, "Then let's make it unforgettable." The morning of our wedding arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The sky was a brushstroke of soft blue. No clouds in sight. The venue, A century-old manor wrapped in roses and wisteria. Looked like something from a novel. Renee arrived first, her lipstick a defiant red, her eyes shimmering as she hugged me. "Your mom's losing her mind right now," she whispered with a wink. "Apparently she threw her phone at the wall when she saw your picture on Instagram." I gave a small smile. Maybe now she knows how silence feels. Then Lauren arrived. And for the first time in her life. She didn't dress like the main character. She wore a soft lilac dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple braid. She hugged Mariah like they'd been friends for years, and sat quietly next to Renee and Lily near the front row. She didn't take selfies, didn't post, didn't perform, for the first time. She just showed up. And that's when I realized maybe this wedding wasn't just a celebration. Maybe it was a reset button, a moment to reclaim something that had always been denied to me, my own narrative, my own voice. The ceremony was brief, but radiant. When I saw Mariah walking down the aisle, the noise of years faded into something weightless. We exchanged vows beneath the canopy of ivy, kissed as our friends cheered, and walked hand in hand toward a future no one else would write for us. But just when I thought the past had finally loosened its grip, a server approached me with a small envelope. "Someone dropped this at the front gate," he said it was urgent. I opened it and saw the handwriting immediately. My mother's. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Cream-colored, sealed with care. No name on the front, but I didn't need one. I could recognize my mother's handwriting even in a blur of emotion. For a moment, I debated handing it to Mariah without opening it, but my fingers moved on their own. Inside was a folded note, written in blue ink, the cursive neat, but shaky, like her hand couldn't keep up with her regret. "Claire, we saw the photos. We saw the post. I know you're angry. And I understand now in a way I never did before. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I've failed you, in ways too many to count. But I want you to know, even if you never speak to me again, that I am proud of you. I've watched you become someone strong and graceful, despite how invisible we made you feel. I kept every drawing, every report card, every photo of you, not because I wanted to control you, but because I didn't know how to show you love without smothering it in expectation. You were never the shadow. We were just too blind to see your light. I'm sorry. And I love you. Mom." I stared at it, the ink smudging slightly beneath my thumb. The words hit hard, but not in the way I expected. They didn't shatter me. They didn't erase years of being sidelined, or the ache of countless holidays spent as an afterthought. But they cracked something open, a door I hadn't realized I'd sealed shut years ago. I didn't know what to do with that door yet. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my purse without saying a word. Mariah approached, concern soft in her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked. I handed her the envelope silently. She read it, then looked at me. "Do you want to respond?" she said again, just as she had days ago. But this time, the answer wasn't as certain. "I don't know," I whispered. "Not yet." Because even though a part of me wanted to believe that note changed everything, the rest of me knew words on paper were easy. Change took more than ink. It took time. It took presence. It took showing up not just once, but over and over again. And they hadn't earned that yet. Not fully. The rest of the reception passed like a slow exhale. People danced, laughed, shared stories under string lights. And through it all, Mariah never left my side. We were surrounded by people who had chosen us without hesitation, who didn't care about perfect optics or family theatrics. For the first time in my life, I was loved without condition. But just when I thought the chapter was ending quietly, life cracked the door open again. A month later, Mariah and I returned from our honeymoon, a quiet, coastal getaway where we left our phones in drawers and forgot what time zones we belonged to. We came back to reality slowly, unpacking suitcases of sand-strewn clothes and photo rolls of sun-kissed memories. On a warm Saturday afternoon, we were sitting on the floor with coffee mugs and a stack of wedding photos when the doorbell rang. Mariah stood, still barefoot, and answered the door. I heard voices, soft, hesitant, then footsteps, and when I looked up, there she was, my mother. No makeup, no perfect hair, just a cardigan over an old blouse, jeans slightly wrinkled, and eyes that looked like she hadn't slept through a single night since the wedding. She didn't speak immediately. She simply extended her arms and handed me a small wooden box. "I found this in the attic last week," she said, voice trembling. "I thought I'd lost it. Or maybe I just didn't want to look at it until now." I opened it slowly. Inside were fragments of a forgotten girl, photos of my 5th birthday, me, in a mismatched tiara with chocolate on my cheek, a spelling bee certificate from 4th grade with my name in gold foil, a laminated drawing of a purple dinosaur I barely remembered sketching. At the bottom, folded like a secret, was a Father's Day card I'd made when I was 7. "You're the best," Daddy scrawled in crooked red crayon. I stared at the contents for a long time, the past pressing into the present like a bruise. "I didn't throw these away," she said. "I just put them somewhere I wouldn't have to face what we lost." Her voice cracked again. "I was wrong, Claire, about so much, about what you needed, about how to love you. I don't expect a second chance, but I'm here if you ever want to find a way back." I didn't answer right away, because the part of me that had waited years for this moment, the apology, the gesture, the soft truth, wasn't prepared for how small it would feel when it finally arrived. This wasn't a cinematic reunion. It was 2 women standing on the edges of an old wound, not knowing if they could stitch it closed or would just reopen it wider. But it was something, a beginning, a sliver of possibility. Mariah came over quietly and wrapped an arm around my waist, anchoring me. My mother stood there for a few seconds longer, as if waiting for permission to cry. Then she simply nodded once, whispered, "Thank you for letting me say that," and turned to leave. I watched her go. I didn't run after her, didn't slam the door, either. I just stood there, the box still open, wondering how many versions of myself I'd buried to become the woman I was now. How many holidays I'd sat in silence. How many proud moments I had to gift to someone else before I learned how to celebrate myself. That night, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the last bit of light filtered through our curtains, I sat alone in the living room, the wooden box beside me, Mariah asleep on the couch, a blanket tossed over her shoulders. I picked up one of the photos, me at 9, grinning gap-toothed beside a science fair project. For a moment, I could almost hear her voice again. "That's our Claire, always so independent." That word independent, it had followed me like a shadow, used as praise, but always with an undertone, as if independence meant I didn't need comfort, didn't crave inclusion, as if being strong was a reason to be ignored. But not anymore. I stood up and walked to the guest room, pulled out a new photo album, and began sliding the pictures in, one by one. Each click of plastic was a reclamation, a restoration, not of the family I never had, but of the one I was building now, with Mariah, with myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was asking to be seen. I had become the main character in a story I finally chose to write. But what happens when the people you walked away from start finding their way back 2 weeks later? The phone calls started again. First from Camille, then Aunt Lily, even Uncle Jerome, who hadn't spoken to me since the infamous Thanksgiving, where I dared to bring up politics. Each one was a variation on the same theme: concern masked as curiosity, followed by the awkward confession, "Your mom's been different lately." I didn't ask what they meant. I didn't want to know. The moment I opened that door, I risked undoing every ounce of progress I had clawed for. But then came the message from Aunt Celine Claire. "Your dad showed up at my place last night. He sat on the porch for an hour and didn't say a word. I think he wants to talk. I think he's finally listening." I stared at her text like it was written in another language. The man who once said I was too emotional for my own good now wanted to listen. I didn't believe it. I couldn't afford to, because hope, when extended prematurely, could be a crueler betrayal than silence. Still, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way Mariah watched me carefully every time I turned my phone face down, or the way I instinctively held my breath at every new notification. One evening, while folding laundry, I found myself pausing shirt in hand, wondering what I'd even say to my father if he stood before me. How do you speak to a man who's always talked over you? How do you rewrite a history already written in years of absence? I didn't have long to wonder, because that Saturday, as I was watering the front porch plants, a car pulled up slowly to the curb. The engine shut off, the door creaked open, and there he was, my father, wearing the same brown jacket I remembered from countless parent-teacher nights, still with that impossible-to-read expression that made every childhood mistake feel like a courtroom sentencing. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. He approached slowly, like he was scared I'd vanish if he stepped too fast. "Hi, Claire," he said, his voice lower than I remembered, less command, more wear. "Do you have a minute?" I glanced at the watering can in my hand, then back at him. Finally, I nodded once and gestured toward the porch swing. He sat. I remained standing, a silent boundary between him and the doorway. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," he began, but I couldn't let this sit anymore. Not after everything. I didn't speak. Let him carry the weight. "Your mom's a mess," he added with a sigh. "She's trying. She doesn't always get it right. But she's not the villain here." That made my eyes narrow. So that's what this was: damage control. She made a public post accusing me of trying to erase the family from my life. I replied, voice sharp but steady, then handed me a letter hoping it would undo years of favoritism. Silence and outright dismissal. I don't care what she's crying about now. I care about the years I spent being invisible to both of you. He rubbed his temples, and for a second, he looked 10 years older. "You're right. We failed you. Claire, I failed you. I thought I was doing what was best, letting you be strong, independent. I didn't realize that what I called strength was just you surviving without support." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was the first time he had said the quiet part out loud, the part that hurt the most. He looked up, eyes glossy. "I wasn't there. Not really. I let your mom lead and thought I was doing my job by providing. But I should have protected you too. From the imbalance. From her blind spots. From us." There was a long silence, a silence so dense it felt like fog pressing against the windows. I sat down slowly, placing the watering can at my feet. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Everything." He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the street, as if the answer was written in the cracks of the asphalt. "Every day," he said finally. "I missed so much, and I can't get it back. But if you ever find room for me again, I'll be here." It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And it was more than I ever expected from the man who had always chosen silence over confrontation. I nodded once, a small signal that the door was cracked, not open, but not slammed shut either. He stood, Understanding it was time to go. "Thank you for hearing me," he said. Then he walked down the steps and back to the car without looking back. That night, I told Mariah everything. She listened without interruption, her hand resting gently on my knee. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said. "You can hold space for them and still protect your peace." I nodded, but inside, the tug of conflict had already begun. Because what do you do when the very people who broke you start learning how to rebuild? The answer, as it turned out, came not from a decision, but from an invitation. 3 days later, Camille texted again, this time, not with guilt or defense, but with sincerity. "I know everything's still raw, but I've been thinking about what you said, about the narrative, about who gets to tell our story. So, what if we did it together? One dinner, just you, me, and Aunt Celine. No parents, no drama, just honesty." My thumb hovered over the screen. Dinner with the sister who had once hijacked every celebration. But then again, she had shown up when no one else did. She had looked me in the eye, not as a rival, but as someone finally realizing the cost of always being in the spotlight. Slowly, I typed, "Okay, one dinner, that's it." She responded within seconds. "Thursday, 7 p.m. My treat. Just come as you are." As I read her reply, I felt the familiar sting of apprehension rise in my chest. Could I trust this moment, or was it another chapter in a cycle I'd spent my life trying to escape? And more importantly, what would I say when the dinner table finally became a place for the truth? Thursday evening arrived under a slate gray sky, the kind that makes you check the weather twice before deciding not to bring an umbrella. I stood outside the restaurant, a small, family-owned Italian place Camille had picked, tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio, wondering if this was a terrible idea. But I walked in anyway, and there she was, Camille, already seated, nervously stirring the straw in her iced tea like it was a time bomb. Aunt Celine sat beside her, smiling tightly, like she was holding her breath. "Claire," Camille stood up, half-hugged me. "Thanks for coming." I nodded. Sitting down, the table was quiet, 3 women circling an invisible war, trying not to trip any minds. The waiter brought water. Menus stayed closed. And then Camille spoke first. "Surprising me. I owe you something more than an apology." She paused. "I owe you an acknowledgement of everything, of how many birthdays I overshadowed, of how many times I watched you fade into the background and never said a word." Her voice wavered, but didn't break. I didn't know what it meant to be the favorite, not until I realized what it meant to be the forgotten. And when you didn't come to the engagement party, it didn't hit me right away. But when the wedding invitation never came, it felt like gravity shifted. Celine nodded slowly, watching me more than Camille. "You're not wrong to feel everything you're feeling, Claire," she said softly, "and you're not alone in it." I took a breath. It was the first time someone in the family had said those exact words, acknowledging that my pain wasn't just some hypersensitivity, but something real, something valid, something long ignored. Camille leaned forward. "I read your text, over and over again. I'm not bitter, just done pretending it doesn't hurt." That sentence gutted me. She looked down, and I realized I've been pretending too. Pretending our family wasn't broken in the ways it celebrated me while dimming you. There was something raw in her eyes. Not rehearsed, not performative, just vulnerable. I finally spoke. "You know what hurt the most? It wasn't even being excluded from the party. It was the justification. The way Mom said, we didn't want drama. As if my presence was inherently toxic. As if my existence was a threat to your happiness." Camille looked stricken, and for a moment, I saw the younger version of her, the child who once cried because her balloon popped and got a replacement within minutes, while I had to console myself when mine drifted away in the wind. "I'm trying to be different," she said. "Not perfect, just different, more aware, more human." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I don't know if this will mean anything, but I wrote you a letter. I figured maybe it'd be easier to say things that way. No interruptions, no sidelong glances from Mom." I took it without opening it, just held it for a second, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as an act of presence, of choosing not to walk away just yet. The rest of the meal passed quietly. We talked about safer things: Mariah's work, Celine's recent trip to Oregon, Camille's job, but beneath it all was a shared awareness, like the feeling of sitting in a house after a storm, grateful the roof held, but still wiping the water off the floor. When we stepped outside, Camille hesitated before getting into her car. "Claire," she said gently, "if you ever let them back in even just a little, can you tell me? I'd like to try and do it right, if you ever want to." "I'll think about it," I replied. And this time, I meant it. Back home, I sat on the couch while Mariah prepped dinner. The envelope still sat unopened in my lap. She noticed. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I feel steady. For once. I feel like I'm not the one chasing clarity." I didn't open the letter that night, or the next day, but on the third morning, just as the sun cut through the blinds with that soft golden promise of a new beginning, I finally did. The letter was simple, raw, apologetic, without over-explaining. Camille recounted memories I'd thought only I held: my 8th grade recital, where no one cheered. The Christmas I spent alone in my room after being overlooked for yet another Camille-centric tradition. She wrote, "I see you now, Claire, fully. And if I could go back and reroute every spotlight, I would." It was the closest thing I'd ever received to accountability wrapped in affection, and it made something inside me unclench. The next few weeks blurred in the best way. Wedding photos arrived. Thank you cards were mailed. I even met up with Lily and Celine again for coffee, where we laughed honest laughter, not the strained, awkward kind that used to live between family members, pretending nothing was wrong. And then, one morning, something unexpected happened. I got a call from my mom. I stared at the screen. Not a text, not a letter, a call. I didn't answer. 2 days later, a box arrived at our doorstep. No note, no signature, just a return address in my parents' handwriting. Inside, an old family photo album I hadn't seen in 15 years. My childhood preserved in faded pages: school awards, summer camps, a crumpled drawing I once made titled "Me and Mom at the Beach," and taped to the back cover. A note in my mom's cursive: "I found this in the attic. I hope one day you'll show it to your children." I sat in silence, the weight of it all sinking in like dusk. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt still. Because this wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something quieter, more cautious, like an olive branch left on the porch. No knock, no demand, just left there, waiting to be noticed. That night, I placed the box on the shelf above the fireplace. Mariah walked by, gave me a knowing smile, and said nothing. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't about weddings anymore, or birthdays missed, or speeches hijacked. It was about identity, about taking the fragments of who I'd been and letting them become part of who I was becoming. Not a daughter trying to earn space in a spotlight, but a woman who had built her own. And as I sat down beside the woman I loved, surrounded by peace we had crafted from chaos, I understood for the first time in my life that I wasn't seeking permission to matter. I always had. And now, I no longer needed them to see it, to believe it myself. But maybe, just maybe, I'd let them try. Story 2. My name is Charlotte Rayner, and until the day my father died, I believed I understood what family meant. At 29, I had carved a modest but fulfilling career as a financial advisor in Los Angeles, often advising others on how to plan their legacies, never expecting my own would unravel in ways no textbook ever prepared me for. My father, Richard Rayner, passed away suddenly from a cardiac arrest at 56. He was the quiet backbone of our family, measured, dignified, and never one to flaunt success. We all assumed he lived comfortably, but modestly. So when the lawyer opened the sealed envelope containing his final will, what came next fractured our reality. Richard had left behind a $50 million estate. 50 million. Not only was the number staggering, but the allocation of it shattered us. The will gave the vast majority to me and my younger sister Sabrina, leaving my mother, Susan, with barely a sliver. It was an earthquake no one saw coming. My mother sat frozen in that wood-paneled office, her eyes wide with disbelief, her hands trembling. This was the man she had been married to for over 30 years. She had sacrificed her career, her passions, and her youth to support him. And now this. It didn't feel like inheritance. It felt like betrayal. Sabrina, only 26 and a free-spirited graphic designer living in Oakland, was strangely composed through the reading. Unlike Mom, she didn't cry or question. Her calm unnerved me, as though she had known this would happen. She said little, only nodding when the attorney read the clauses, her fingers playing with the edge of her coffee cup like she'd heard it all before. I couldn't tell if it was shock or preparation. And me, I was suspended somewhere between shock and guilt. I loved my father deeply, but I couldn't understand his silence in life. Why didn't he share the truth of his wealth with us? Why this strange and cruel division? It didn't help that in his will, he'd written vague phrases like, "For those who truly understand legacy," and to reward foresight over comfort. It sounded like riddles meant to justify something darker. Susan's grief turned quickly into suspicion. She questioned the authenticity of the will, her sorrow morphing into anger. "This isn't the man I married," she whispered that night, her voice hoarse from crying. Or maybe I never knew who he really was. The house we grew up in, once warm with memories, turned cold and unfamiliar. My mother started staying in her room, barely eating, poring over bank statements and trying to decode the man she once believed in. As the days stretched into weeks, she announced she was going to challenge the will in court. Her lawyer, a tenacious man named Gregory Holloway, took the case immediately. Sensing scandal, Sabrina and I stood on opposing sides of that decision. She wanted to respect Dad's last wishes, while Mom and I sought answers. Each time we spoke, we clashed, our family bond thinning, thread by thread. And then came the second blow, something we never expected, when my mother officially filed to contest the will. The shift from mourning to litigation was abrupt and jarring. What had once been grief now took on the shape of suspicion, sharpened into strategy by her attorney, Gregory Holloway. Gregory was relentless, his sharp suits and sharper arguments filling our house with legal documents, subpoenas, and phrases like undue influence and testamentary capacity. My mother, Susan, was no longer just a grieving widow. She became a woman on a mission to reclaim her dignity and uncover the truth behind her husband's hidden empire. Her argument was rooted in betrayal. She claimed that the will didn't reflect the man she had spent over 3 decades with, a man who never spoke of investments, offshore accounts, or staggering sums of money. Gregory proposed that perhaps Richard had been manipulated, maybe even coerced into rewriting his will. Maybe. Susan speculated with growing conviction. Someone close to him had influenced his decisions while she was left in the dark. And if not, then why all the secrecy? Meanwhile, Sabrina grew increasingly distant. At first, I thought she was simply overwhelmed, but soon it became clear she had no intention of supporting Mom's challenge. Dad knew what he was doing, she said flatly one night over dinner, picking at her food. You might not agree with it, but that doesn't mean it wasn't his choice. Her voice had lost its softness. Each word was sharp, intentional. We weren't just disagreeing, we were becoming adversaries. My sister, who had once been my closest confidant, was now aligned with the father we didn't fully understand. I found myself trapped between two women. I loved my mother's heartache and Sabrina's stoicism at family gatherings. Silence replaced laughter. Tension clung to the air like humidity. Every conversation circled back to the same questions. Why did Dad hide this fortune? Why this unequal split? Was it punishment? A test? Or had we simply failed to see the man he truly was? Gregory soon unearthed a series of financial documents revealing Richard had invested in multiple startup ventures, some dating back nearly 2 decades. These weren't casual investments, they were strategic, aggressive, and highly successful. Richard had been more than a modest financial planner, as he led us to believe he'd been building a silent empire. How had he hidden it so well? And more importantly, who else had known? The media caught wind of the case, spinning it into a modern-day parable of secrets and fortune. Headlines called us the fractured Rainers, and cameras camped outside our home. I had to navigate courtrooms and news vans, all while trying to hold together a family unraveling from the inside. Every time we stepped into court, old wounds were reopened. Every new document revealed secrets we never imagined. But the most damning piece of evidence was still to come. One late evening, as I sifted through my father's encrypted financial logs passed on by Gregory's team, I stumbled upon a familiar name buried in a hidden transaction file dated 3 years prior. It was a name I never expected to find, a name that would force me to confront the unthinkable. The name I found in that hidden transaction file sent a cold shiver down my spine. Margot Ellis, my father's longtime assistant. She had worked with him for over 15 years. A woman of quiet presence and relentless efficiency, never a subject of gossip, always in the background, invisible yet indispensable. But there it was, a $1.2 million wire transfer to a trust in her name, routed through a holding company registered offshore. The date matched the exact week my father had rewritten his will. I didn't know what was worse, the possibility that my father had been in a clandestine relationship with Margot, or that she might have manipulated him into altering the will. Either option cracked the foundation of everything I believed about our family. My hands trembled as I closed the file. Sabrina needed to know, though part of me feared her reaction. She had idolized our father's precision and secrecy, almost revered his choices. Revealing this could fracture the fragile truce we barely maintained. The following evening, I showed Sabrina the file. Her expression didn't shift immediately, but her jaw tensed. "That doesn't mean anything," she said. Dad trusted her. Maybe it was a bonus or an investment. Her voice was clipped, defensive, but her eyes, those told a different story. She knew, or at least, she was starting to doubt. In the days that followed, our legal team confronted Margot under oath. She was evasive but careful, never outright denying the financial ties, but framing them as professional gestures of trust. It was a calculated answer. Gregory wasn't buying it. Neither was the judge, who approved a motion to investigate the trust further. That was the moment our narrative began to shift from a grieving family torn by a mysterious will to something darker, something closer to betrayal, orchestrated from within. My mother, surprisingly, didn't gloat. Instead, She looked almost mournful. If he gave her that money. She whispered one night. Then he'd already left me long before he died. Her pain was deeper than money. It was the realization that the man she shared her life with might have compartmentalized her existence while building another in secret. That grief couldn't be measured in dollars or legal victories. It sat in her eyes, quiet and heavy. The courtroom turned tense. Margot's name dominated every filing. Sabrina, now clearly unsettled, began withdrawing even more, skipping mediation meetings and refusing to discuss the case. The sister I once knew was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to bring her back. Then came another discovery. This one not in a document or court motion, but buried in an old email chain recovered from my father's encrypted archive. It was from Margot, a message to someone named RH, dated a year before his death. It read, "They don't need to know. Not yet. When the time comes, the estate will speak for itself." A cryptic sentence, but enough to send our entire case spinning in a new direction. The email changed everything. Who was RH? The initials didn't match anyone we knew in the family. Not friends, not business partners, at least none that were publicly known. For days, I obsessed over that message. The estate will speak for itself. Was the will merely the surface of a much deeper, calculated plan? Gregory and our forensic team intensified the investigation, combing through Robert's old travel logs, offshore activity, and encrypted cloud storage. We were no longer just chasing hidden assets, we were chasing intent. Then we found it. A private email account linked to an obscure domain registered in Switzerland. The account belonged to R.H. Foster, an estate strategist known for working with ultra-wealthy individuals who wanted to bypass traditional legal frameworks. His client list was shrouded in NDAs and numbered corporations. But one recovered invoice made it through addressed to Robert Hayes, dated 4 months before his death. The services, contingency trust formation, legacy restructuring, psychological inheritance impact modeling. It sounded less like estate planning and more like a chess game involving human emotions. Sabrina was livid when she learned about it. He was planning this like a social experiment. She snapped. We were all pawns. Her voice cracked not from anger, but heartbreak, for the first time. She wasn't defending him. She was grieving the father she thought she had, realizing he might have engineered their final goodbye with cold calculation. Mom, meanwhile, said nothing for days. Then, during one of the mandated therapy sessions, she broke down. I didn't marry a billionaire. I married a man who drank burnt coffee and forgot to lock the garage door. And now I'm expected to believe he was orchestrating secret trusts across 3 continents. The therapist nodded gently, but we all sat in silence. None of us had an answer. The final hearing was approaching. Margot was subpoenaed again, this time not as a peripheral figure, but as a potential co-architect of Robert's hidden estate network, under oath, and with her legal counsel by her side. She admitted to facilitating transfers, code names, even emotional profiling. Her words came slowly, measured. Robert believed legacy wasn't about fairness. It was about awakening character through conflict. The room fell cold. In that moment, something inside me shifted. He had done this on purpose not to reward us, not even to punish us, but to test who we would become in the absence of his control. The money, the secrecy, the imbalance, it was all a crucible. And like fire, it either forged or destroyed. The only question now was which one had we become. But just when we thought the game was ending, another envelope arrived handwritten, postmarked exactly 1 year after his death. It was addressed to me. Inside, a single sentence in my father's handwriting. The real inheritance was never in the will. I read that note over and over again. The real inheritance was never in the will. My father's final words to me, delivered posthumously like a riddle wrapped in grief. It didn't matter that we had spent nearly a year entangled in litigation, family counseling, media scandals, and a growing mountain of forensic documents. That one sentence dismantled every assumption I had left. What did he mean? Was this some poetic farewell or a final power play? I wasn't sure anymore, but I knew I had to find out. I brought the letter to Gregory. He examined it carefully, scanning for hidden codes or embedded metadata. Nothing. Just ink, paper, and Robert's unmistakable script. But Gregory wasn't convinced it was meaningless. "We're missing context," he said. "You don't bury a message like this unless there's a framework for understanding it." So we turned to what we hadn't yet fully processed: his journals. Stored in a sealed cabinet we had overlooked in the wine cellar. We found 27 leather-bound notebooks. They spanned 2 decades, filled with musings, diagrams, clipped newspaper articles, and letters he never sent. It was like peering into a parallel version of my father, a man obsessed not with wealth, but with legacy, philosophy, and what he called psychological conditioning through inheritance. In one entry, he wrote, "True wealth lies in choice, not possession. One's moral inheritance outlasts any trust fund." In that moment, I realized he had been preparing us not just to receive wealth, but to confront our own values. The unequal will wasn't a mistake. It was intentional chaos meant to surface our truest selves. Sabrina's obsession with control, Mom's fear of being left behind, and my own paralysis caught between duty and identity. He had cracked each of us open and watched what spilled out. I shared the journals with my mother. She read in silence, tears tracing quiet lines down her cheeks. "He didn't stop loving us," she whispered. "He just stopped trusting peace." It hit me hard. Maybe Robert believed comfort made us complacent. Maybe he thought pain was the only true catalyst for change. And maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. Sabrina, however, wasn't ready to forgive. "I won't celebrate a man who turned his family into a case study," she said, slamming one of the journals shut. But even in her anger, I saw something different: clarity. She no longer needed to defend him. She was building her own stance, apart from his shadow. Still, the truth lingered like a splinter, sharp and inescapable. If the will wasn't the real inheritance, what had he actually left us with? That question stayed with me as I opened the final journal. Inside the back cover was a list: people's names, businesses, cities, none of them familiar. But next to each was a date. One of them matched the day he died. Another was today's date. And beside that, a single line: "Meet me in what remains." I didn't know if it was metaphor or map, but I knew this story wasn't over. Story 3. My name is Megan Miller. I'm 30 years old, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had a pretty normal life. I work as a graphic designer at a mid-sized creative agency in Brookmere, Illinois, a quiet city that's just busy enough to keep you occupied, but still small enough for everyone to know your business. Life was on track, steady, predictable. That night, I stood in a warmly lit restaurant, the scent of fresh florals wafting in the air, surrounded by candlelight, soft jazz, and the hum of polite laughter. It was my engagement party, mine and Nathan's. After 4 years together, we were finally planning the wedding we'd dreamed of. Everything felt surreal, almost cinematic. The clinking glasses, the golden centerpieces, the way Nathan gently held the small of my back as we moved through the room. It all felt like a dream beginning to take shape. But looking back now, I realized that night wasn't the start of a beautiful chapter. It was the beginning of something much darker. Nathan had joined my agency's creative department right after I got promoted to lead designer. We clicked from day one, both ambitious, grounded, and a little bit sarcastic. It was a spark that turned into coffee breaks, late-night pitch revisions, then dinners, vacations, and eventually building a life together. We were careful, practical. We didn't rush. And when he proposed during a quiet weekend trip to Lake Geneva, it wasn't some over-the-top production, it was simple, heartfelt, and perfect. Our wedding was planned for 4 months later. Not extravagant, but meaningful. A modest ceremony, a garden reception, and a future built on the values we both cherished: loyalty, transparency, and self-made success. That's why what happened that night blindsided me completely. Our closest friends and family were there. His parents had flown in from Oregon. Cousins I hadn't seen in years showed up grinning with champagne flutes. And of course, my own family sat at the front. Dressed neatly, but emotionally distant. My father, Owen, had the same polite but faintly uncomfortable look he always wore at social functions. My younger sister, Khloe, predictably, scrolled through her phone most of the night. She had a reputation for carelessness, 3 broken phones in a single year, and a dozen canceled plans. We'd never been close. And honestly, I'd stopped trying years ago. But I didn't let any of that ruin the evening. This was about love, celebration, and moving forward. Or so I thought until my mother, Karen, raised her glass for a toast. She stood with an elegant stiffness, like she was holding in something just beneath the surface. "Congratulations to my beautiful daughter, Megan," she began with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And to Nathan, may your marriage be filled with joy and strength." There was polite applause, the usual chorus of cheers, and I smiled gratefully at Nathan as he gave my hand a light squeeze. But then her voice shifted slightly colder, more formal. "We also have an announcement to make," she said, glancing briefly at my father. "After some long discussions, your father and I have decided to reallocate the wedding fund." There was a beat of silence. I blinked, unsure if I'd misunderstood. "We've decided to give the $45,000 originally set aside for Megan's wedding to her sister Khloe instead." For a moment, the room didn't react. It was like time froze in confusion. I chuckled awkwardly. "That's not funny. Mom." I looked around for some kind of shared joke, but all I saw were stunned expressions. "That money is mine. It's in my account. You can't just give it away." My mother's expression didn't change. "It's not a joke," she said calmly, setting down her wine glass. "Khloe is getting married a few months after you, and she and her fiancé are struggling. You and Nathan both have stable jobs. You can figure it out." The words hit like ice water down my spine. All the careful planning, the budgeting, the venue deposits, we'd already started using the fund. My throat tightened, heat rising up my neck. "That's not how this works," I said quietly. "You told me the money was mine when I turned 25. It's in my name. It was supposed to help build my future." Karen's smile disappeared entirely now. "You've always had more than her," she said. "Khloe's made mistakes. Yes, but she deserves a fresh start. She deserves something beautiful too." And that's when it truly clicked. This wasn't about fairness. It was about guilt. It was about covering up Khloe's irresponsibility by gutting my foundation. The air thickened. People shifted in their seats. Nathan whispered something meant to soothe me, but I couldn't hear it. I stood up slowly, trembling with rage and disbelief. And then the unthinkable happened. My mother walked across the room and, in front of everyone, slapped me across the face. The sound of her hand meeting my skin echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Time didn't slow down, it cracked wide open. My head snapped to the side, cheek burning, vision blurring with sudden tears I didn't want anyone to see. Gasps rippled through the room. A few guests dropped their utensils. Others froze mid-sip, unsure of how to process what had just happened. I turned back toward her slowly, my voice low but solid. "You don't get to hit me just because I said no." I saw it in her eyes then, not regret, not confusion, but cold calculation. She wanted to humiliate me. She had planned this. Maybe not the slap, but certainly the power move. And, as I stared at the woman who raised me, I realized I was facing someone I didn't recognize anymore. Nathan stood beside me, stiff as a board, his hand finding mine again. The murmurs grew louder. Somewhere near the bar, a waiter spoke urgently into a phone. "Yes, I'd like to report an assault. Happened just now. Alden's Bistro, within minutes." The sound of sirens was audible just beyond the restaurant's soft jazz soundtrack. 2 uniformed officers arrived, cutting through the awkward stillness of the crowd like a blade. One approached me and asked if I was the one who had been assaulted. I nodded, my voice surprisingly steady. A second waiter confirmed everything: the slap, the witness accounts, even pointing out the red mark blooming on my cheek like a badge of disgrace. Karen tried to argue it was just a family matter, that emotions had gotten out of hand, but the officer's reply was clear and unemotional: public assault, regardless of relation, is still assault. They asked if I wanted to press charges. The question echoed in my mind, louder than the sirens. Every part of me screamed yes, but a small, wounded piece of my heart hesitated. This was my mother, my family. But then I remembered her words. "You've always had more." She didn't see me as her daughter in that moment, she saw me as an obstacle. "Yes," I said clearly. "I want to press charges." They arrested her right there in the restaurant. The handcuffs clicked. And still, she refused to look at me. Khloe stared at me like I was a monster. My father followed the officers silently, without a word in my defense, and as they escorted my mother outside, the only sound left was the echo of my own heartbeat, pounding like a war drum. Later that night, still stunned, I sat in our apartment with a frozen bag of peas pressed to my face and my phone lighting up with messages I couldn't bear to read. Nathan was pacing the kitchen, one hand gripping his phone, the other clenched at his side. "Your mom just got released on bail," he said finally. "Her attorney says she's pleading not guilty." I closed my eyes. Of course she was. Denial wasn't just her defense mechanism, it was her entire personality. We contacted my lawyer the next morning and filed the report officially. My mother was charged with misdemeanor assault. Her court date was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, my parents refused to speak to me. Khloe blocked me on every platform, and my father. He simply went silent, as if vanishing was less messy than choosing sides. The engagement party fallout spread fast, morphing into a family Cold War. But just when I thought the worst was over, the second blow landed. 3 weeks after the incident, I came home from work to find a thick envelope in our mailbox. A letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, Hall & Sutter Associates. Inside was a formal notice. My parents were suing me, not for the slap, for the wedding fund. According to them, the $45,000 had been mistakenly believed to be mine, and they were petitioning to reclaim it, claiming it was intended exclusively for educational purposes. I stared at the document in disbelief, my hands shaking. That money had been given to me outright. The custodial account had transferred to my full control when I was 19. No strings, no footnotes, no restrictions. I laughed short, breathless, disbelieving. "This is insane," I muttered. "It's literally my account." Nathan sat beside me, jaw clenched. "They're going to try and bankrupt you into submission." We retained legal counsel the following day, Brianna Lane, a sharp, composed attorney with eyes like steel and a voice that could cut glass. After reviewing the documents, she looked up calmly. They don't have a case. The account was gifted. In your name, there's no clause, no written intent restricting usage. A verbal agreement won't hold up. I nodded, part relieved, part furious. Then why are they doing this? Brianna didn't blink. Because they're not after the money. They're after control. They're trying to make you bend. Her words sank like a stone in my gut. The next few weeks bled into each other. Court filings, phone calls, emails from Brianna. I was exhausted, burned out, barely sleeping, at work. I forced smiles during presentations and silently cried in the elevator. The emotional weight was heavier than anything physical. And Khloe, she played her role to perfection. Smug at court, polished on social media, posting filtered images of wedding dress fittings and cryptic quotes about karma always working. But I didn't respond. I held my silence. I focused on the legal truth and the moral one. Still, I couldn't shake the question haunting me every night. How far would my family go just to tear me down? The first court hearing arrived like a storm cloud, quiet at first. Then suddenly thunderous. I wore a tailored navy suit, hair tied back, makeup clean and minimal. Nathan stood beside me, solid as ever, his quiet strength wrapping around me like armor. Across the room sat my parents and Khloe. They didn't look at me. My mother wore a pale gray dress and an expression that suggested she'd convinced herself she was the victim. My father, Owen, kept his eyes low. Khloe, in a soft pink blazer, sat straight with a confidence she hadn't earned. I recognized that look. She was smug because she believed the outcome was guaranteed, that somehow their version of the truth would overwrite mine. The judge reviewed the initial filings. Brianna presented the original custodial account records, including signed transfer documents from when I was 19. She spoke with precision, emphasizing the total lack of any written restriction or limitation. When Khloe took the stand, she tried to paint the picture of a miscommunication, how the fund was always meant for education, and how she'd assumed Meghan knew that. Brianna didn't even flinch. Did you use your own fund strictly for education? Ms. Miller, she asked. Khloe hesitated. Well, not entirely. But that's different. I had circumstances. You bought a luxury car, Brianna stated. Tone flat. You also used part of your fund to launch a boutique, which failed in under a year. Correct. Khloe shifted, her smile wilting. That's not what this is about. Actually, it's exactly what this is about, Brianna said. If you are allowed to use your fund freely, why is my client being punished for doing the same? The courtroom fell silent. My parents didn't react, not even a twitch. Watching them silent, still, complicit, I felt something twist inside me. It wasn't just about money. It was about being scapegoated to justify their favoritism. Khloe had failed, and instead of letting her live with the consequences, they decided to rewrite the rules and make me the villain for succeeding. When we stepped outside after the session, Nathan placed a hand on my lower back, grounding me. You were incredible in there, he said quietly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. It's not over. I knew it wasn't, not by a long shot. And I was right. A week later, I started getting strange texts from distant cousins. Sorry to hear about the cancellation. One said, wishing you peace through the breakup. My blood ran cold. What cancellation? I typed back. Over the next hour, I received 3 more messages from confused guests, asking about the wedding being called off. Someone had sent out mass emails, under my name, announcing the wedding was no longer happening. But I hadn't written them. I hadn't canceled anything. I logged into my email, nothing in my sent folder, which meant someone had made a fake account. Someone had impersonated me. My phone buzzed again. It was Aunt Mara, my mom's sister, and the only relative who hadn't picked a side. "I was about to call you," she said. Voice low. "Karen's been calling people, telling them you're unstable, that Nathan cheated and the engagement is off. She's spinning a whole story." I nearly dropped my phone. "She's lying to everyone, sweetheart," Mara said gently. "She's always protected Khloe, even when Khloe didn't deserve it. Now she's rewriting your life to keep the focus off the fact that they betrayed you." I stood there, stunned. I hadn't cried in weeks, not even during court. But now the tears came fast, hot, and involuntary. Not just because of the lies, but because my own mother had weaponized her voice against me. It wasn't enough to try and take my future. Now she wanted to take my name. That night, as if the universe hadn't already maxed out my ability to absorb betrayal, Nathan walked in from work and handed me his phone, jaw clenched. "You need to see this," he said. On the screen were several photos grainy, clearly edited, showing someone who looked vaguely like me in suggestive positions with a man I'd never seen before. It was fake, obvious to anyone who looked twice, but the attempt was clear. "Your sister sent these to me," he said. "She told me you were cheating, that I should know the truth before the wedding." The room spun. I sat down hard, hands shaking. "Why would she do this?" I whispered. "Why now?" Nathan crouched down in front of me. "Because they can't stand that you didn't fold, that you're still standing. So they're trying to burn it all down." I stared at the wall. My own blood had forged a campaign to destroy me, not just my bank account, but my character, my relationship, my dignity. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about narrative, about control. And I knew right then that they weren't going to stop on their own. Which meant it was time for me to stop playing defense. We hired security 3 weeks before the wedding, not because of paranoia, but because I had finally accepted the truth. My own family had declared war. Nathan and I sat down together and reviewed photos of my parents and Khloe, submitting them to a professional security firm with one clear instruction: none of them were to step foot near our venue. We hated that it had come to this, that something meant to be joyful had turned into a defensive operation, but it was the only way to protect our peace. We weren't just guarding a ceremony. We were protecting what we'd built: love, trust, boundaries. The venue was a garden estate just outside of Brookmere, understated but beautiful. White chairs lined the lawn in perfect rows, petals scattered along the aisle, a soft arch wrapped in eucalyptus and cream roses. It was the wedding we dreamed of, not for show, but for meaning. The morning of, I woke early with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Nathan and I had decided on a first look before the ceremony. I dressed in silence, my best friend Isabel gently zipping up my gown, her hands steady where mine trembled. "You okay?" she whispered. "Almost," I replied, barely holding it together. At 2:15, a knock came at the bridal suite door. One of the security guards stepped in, lowering his voice. "Miss Harper," he said, "we've detained someone trying to enter through the back service gate. Your sister, Khloe." My heart stopped. "Was she alone?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "but she was carrying a tote bag. Inside was a can of red paint." For a moment, I said nothing. My entire body went still. The silence wasn't numbness, it was calculation. She had planned to destroy my dress, the venue, the memory, one last ambush before I walked down the aisle. "Do you want to press charges?" the guard asked. I looked at him, jaw tight. I had every reason to say yes, but it was my wedding day. I wasn't going to let her take even a second more of it from me. "No," I said, "just remove her and make sure she doesn't come back. Also check the perimeter. I want to be sure my parents aren't trying the same thing." He nodded and left. I sank into a nearby chair, trying to breathe. Isabel knelt in front of me, eyes wide. She brought paint. I nodded. She was going to ruin everything. Isabel took my hand, her voice fierce. Then you've already won. She couldn't stop your happiness, so she tried to destroy it. But you stopped her. Now go get married, and let this be the beginning, not the end. I stood up slowly. Uncle Brian, my father's estranged brother, walked me down the aisle. It wasn't the walk I once imagined, but it was the walk I needed. And when I saw Nathan standing under the arch, looking at me like I was the center of his world, everything else fell away. The ceremony was raw and honest. We exchanged vows that spoke not only of love, but resilience, loyalty, truth. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause felt like thunder. For the first time in months, I felt free. The reception was filled with laughter, speeches that made me cry for all the right reasons, and the kind of joy you can't fake. Isabel toasted us with tears in her eyes, calling me the bravest bride I've ever known. People who'd heard whispers of the drama leaned in, offering quiet respect rather than gossip. No one asked about my parents. No one had to. Later that night, we slipped away under a canopy of stars, rice flying through the air, laughter trailing behind us. I glanced back one last time at the glowing venue. My sister had tried to ruin that moment, but she failed. They all had. Our honeymoon was spent on a quiet beach 3 states away. 3 blissful weeks of silence, sand, and healing. No courtrooms, no smear campaigns. Just us, finally breathing. When we returned, it was time to move forward. We used the remaining wedding fund for a down payment on a modest but lovely apartment just outside the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Built not on loans or guilt, but intention and perseverance. We decorated it slowly, our pace, our style. A couch we saved for, shelves we installed ourselves, wedding photos on the wall, each one a quiet victory. And then, just as the dust began to settle, another ripple. I ran into my cousin Rachel at the grocery store. "Did you hear about Khloe's wedding?" she asked casually. I blinked. "We're not exactly talking," I said. Rachel raised her eyebrows. "Your parents took out a loan. It's going to be at the Grand Garden Hotel. Custom dress, imported chef, the whole thing." I laughed quiet, bitter, tired. Of course they were going all out, even if it meant drowning in debt. "Are you going?" she asked carefully. I stared at her. "She brought red paint to my wedding," I said. "So no, I won't be attending." And I never got an invitation.